What is God's heart towards the needy? The lowly, the oppressed, the weak, those who can't speak for themselves, the powerless. A lot of compassion, right? God cares for, lifts up, gives to. There's a lot going on. Do you know how extraordinary that is? You can look at any other religion, man-made religion, and the whole idea is serve that God, give to that God. Maybe you'll get a little bit of pity from him, but for the most part, no, it's all about those who have the power. Coming to the material side, the material thinking, the empiricist, the evolutionist, and how does that go? Well, it's survival of the fittest, the weak. Well, you know what? We just weed them out so we can have a strong culture and evolve. To care about the needy, those people who can't pay you back, those people who are helpless, those people who may need help and not even know it, those who are in need. But yet, this is the nature of God. We said it's the heart of God, but we've been dealing in this, the truth series, right? And we've been dealing through all of these different spheres, as they call them, the areas of life, our family, our church, our God himself in this triune thing. But the whole thing about Christianity comes down to this, is that the basic precept is this, is in salvation, God comes to live within you. So then the nature of God is within you. So do you see what this is implying? Is that if it's God's nature to care for those who can't even care for themselves, then that should become part of our nature too. It becomes part of our nature. It starts setting us up in this thing called community. Now, we've been dealing with these in areas and kind of visualizing in spheres. And here's community. There's Christ, there's neighbors, there's the needy. Question becomes then, who are really the neighbors and who are really the needy that we're talking about in this whole community thing? First service, this worked out beautiful. I had the courage just to throw the question out. I said, if you described our church in one word, what would you say? Hey, maybe I'll be brave again and say it. One word, what would anybody say in here who's... Okay, loving and caring. Anything else? There we go. Setting me up. Thank you, Norma. Because you know what? When almost everyone I ask, when we talk about, what do you think of our church, or how do you see your church? And one of the most common word is the word friendly. We're a friendly church. And that's great. You know, that element of friendly needs to be in there. This is kind of church growth 101. If people come in and you beat them up, they tend not to come back, you know. Or if they do, they've got a problem, you know. So they may need our help after all. The point is that friendly is good, but if you look in Scripture, you don't find that word. That friendly is not a spiritual gift. It's involved in them. If you have the gift of hospitality, friendliness is part of that. How can you be hospitable and not be friendly? Or if you have the gift of helps, how can you be helpful if you're not friendly enough to connect with people? So friendly fits in there, but these gifts are far, far broader than simply being friendly. So how does that work? If we're getting into God's definition of community, starting with the community within these walls right now, how does that all work? How does the God-defined person in the community work? We're going to pop back to something from last week. We looked at part of a letter that Paul was writing to the church in Corinth. And he was describing them to themselves like this, 2 Corinthians 3:3. And of course, if you've got your guide sheets, you can follow along easy enough on these or your Bible. 2 Corinthians 3:3, Paul said this, they can see that you are a letter from Christ. Wow. As a Christian, As somebody going out there in the world, as somebody to each other, you are a letter from Christ. Keep in mind that the New Testament is almost predominantly what? Letters. They're letters from Christ in the epistles. They're inspired words. And Paul is saying you are a letter from Christ written by us. So we're written by the Word, we're written by the Holy Spirit, but we're also written by the mentorship we get from other people, because Paul was a mentor to the church in Corinth. And he says it's not a letter written with pen or ink, but of Spirit of the living God, not one carved on stone, but in human hearts. You are a living letter from Christ. If you are a Christian, if you are in a living relationship with Christ, you are this living letter. Then it becomes to whom? To whom are you the letter? Well, this is a question that got asked before, and Jesus has explained this in such a genius way that we still quote him in how he answered this today. I'll set up how Jesus answers this question, to whom are you a living letter? It's Luke chapter 10. There's a lawyer involved. Wow, there's always a lawyer involved. Well, in this case, a religious lawyer. Here's somebody who knew the religious law. And he comes to test Jesus, and he says, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus tells him, "What's written in the law? How do you read it? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Of course, that's a summation of all the laws and something from the Old Testament. You know, he's just popping it right out. Jesus says, in effect, you've nailed it. It doesn't say it that way. That's Kevin translation going on there. But that's what he says. And then here we come to the line that really sets up the whole scene we're about to go into. He says, wanting to justify himself, this lawyer says to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Wow, there's a key line. There's something that happens with Christians and churches all the time. Wanting to justify himself, who is my neighbor? What's going on here? Well, this guy is used to the law. He's used to a checklist. He's used to knowing things to do. If I do these things, I'm okay. If I don't, well, then I'll work on them. Who is my neighbor? To justify myself. Is it boundaries? Is it, well, if my neighbor is somebody who lives within 50 miles of me, then I know who I have to deal with. Everybody else can just go wherever. I don't care about them. Or maybe who is my neighbor is, well, if you're enough like me, if you're the same color, or you're the same faith, or the same basic background, then you're my neighbor. You know, if I can put boundaries on it, and everybody else can go. Who is my neighbor? But Jesus decides he's not going to let him off with this, and he takes this question and reworks it. And he doesn't just come out and correct him. He decides to go into a story. And you all know the story, because it's one we recount all the time of the Good Samaritan. Who is my neighbor? Well, okay, here's the story. You know that road from Jerusalem down to Jericho? Yeah, that's a dangerous road. Yeah, well, there was this Jewish guy coming from Jerusalem down there. Oh, one of my brothers. He must be my neighbor. Could be. But anyway, he's going down, and then he gets robbed, and he's left there. He's bleeding. He's unconscious. He can't help himself. He's just the needy. And then along come these neighborly people. There's a priest. Oh, he'll surely help him. No, it doesn't have time. Levite comes. Oh, surely he'll help him. No, it doesn't have time. And then along comes a Samaritan. Ooh, couldn't be more different than me. Inferior in his faith, inferior in his culture, inferior in his social standing. He's just, that guy cannot possibly be my neighbor. But the Samaritan does the oddest thing. He stops and he takes this man and he binds his wounds. And he carries him on his own animal to the closest Ramada Inn. And he pulls out his American Express and says, just charge it to this. I'll be back in a little while. Just take care of the guy. And then Jesus says, who was the neighbor. And he's not asking who was the neighbor in there. What he's really asking is, what is a neighbor? What is a neighbor? Well, this guy, he just didn't like the answer. He can't even bring himself to say Samaritan. He just says, the guy who helped out, the guy with the compassion. It's not who is a neighbor, it's what is a neighbor. It turns the whole thing around because it's asking not who is your neighbor, but are you a neighbor, as God defines it? Are you the type of person in your heart, mind, and soul see others, and when they're in need, you do as the nature of God in you, and you take care of them. You do that type of thing. It's a question of who is not the neighbor, but what is the neighbor. Then you can go on to who is the neighbor. Who is the neighbor? Anyone God brings your way. The question is really, what is a neighbor? That's a lot deeper than just a friendly church, isn't it? That's a lot deeper than saying howdy do at the door. Well, you know what? This person's a nice person. I'll be nice to them. It goes a little deeper, doesn't it? You know what this church is called? Is Canaan Community Church. And you know, I had this discussion with different people. And I said, well, every church should be able to call themselves Community Church. That should be a central thing in any church. Yeah, you're right. If it's a biblically based, Spirit-empowered church, yeah. But every church isn't a community church. I could mention, and you've probably been to some yourself, just take this one instance. A church starts in a neighborhood of some kind, and everybody's alike, everybody's neighbors. And then the demographic changes, maybe the ethnicity or something changes in that neighborhood, and now it's just a pocket of people in the building, and they want nothing to do with the community around them. It happens all the time. Could have happened here. This church has been around a long time. 1869, it was a farmer's church. It was a true blue rural church. Served all kinds of farming families around here. Demographic change. Now we got all the crazy people over here on Heritage Lake, right? And it's a whole other thing. We're commuters. Some of us are from large cities. Some of us to the suburbs somewhere. But we're a different demographic. The church could sit here and go, that's not us. That's not our neighbor. We're a farmer church. And just stay that way. Luckily, we didn't. Luckily, that's not what we are. Bottom line, though, it's very intentional. And the more the change, the more the intention has to be to go out and reach out. It may be God's nature, but it's not always natural to reach out. So by default, every church isn't a community church. Do we have the right to call ourselves, according to God, a community church? I would hope so. I would hope that would be what we're endeavoring to do. God defined. See, you can't have a godly community without godly neighbor. And from the beginning, you think of the church in Jerusalem, that's what it was. It was a godly community living in the community, and it reached out into them and made an impact. But the rubber meets the road at something. It's, even that takes some serious intentionality. Isn't it wonderful to meet people that, we've done it here. Somebody comes in, they look like they really got their act together. Man, I wish they need to be a member of our church. Man, they could really do some good work here if we had that person. And that's okay. Yeah, we want good people. However, that's not where the rubber meets the road. That's not what we said at the beginning was the heart of God. The heart of God was to the lowly, to the helpless, to those who were needy. The heart of God is that. The rubber meets the road on how do we treat those people. How do we reach out to those people who can't pay back, those people who may not even be able to contribute in any material way anyway? How do we reach out to those? Who are the needy? Who are the needy? Now, if I were to simply ask you that question, I bet you all of us would very quickly come up with column A there, because Scripture speaks of them, the poor and the orphan and the widow and the sick, even the prisoner. However, there's column B. It's a little less visible, isn't it? The outcast, the unpopular, the neglected, the left out, the homely, the least, the last, the others. a little less. But in our society, more than one sociologist has said that we are the most disconnected we've ever been in the history of man. Even though we've got all our computers hooking us together and our phones, we are disconnected. I would feel very comfortable in saying, at least in saying the truth, that we lose more people to loneliness and disconnection than we do from physical starvation in this culture. How many people commit suicide? How many are just left to die? How many are abandoned? How many are invisible? How many who are needy? How do we do with those people? Christianity is you have the nature of God, and I just pray, and I believe everyone I'm looking at in here does. But if you have the nature of God, then the rubber meets the road on how we deal with these people. In the evenings, we've got the video sessions that go on. Dr. Del Tackett does a wonderful job as he talks on each topic. And as I studied through his presentation that everybody can see tonight, as I looked through his, he brought up a heart-wrenching story about a girl back in school. And this resonated with me because I was surprised how many didn't say. I said, when you go to school and you're back, whether it's elementary or middle school or high school, and so you get your fringe kids, but then there's usually one or two that are the social lepers. I mean, they are the outcast people won't bother with. Does anybody come to mind to you? Can you think of anybody, if I said, who was that kid who was the outcast in your school? Does anybody come to mind? Rhetorical question, don't shout out any names. But one comes to mind for me. And just to kind of bring this home, rather than just relate Dr. Tackett's story, I thought, let me pull you into my story, see if that doesn't resonate with you. My story goes all the way back to grade 3, and I'm just going to call my outcast Mary. And Mary transferred in grade 3, and before she ever got there was kind of rumors going around. Basically, Mary was kind of goofy. Mary was ugly. Well, what's ugly in grade 3, right? Whatever people say, was she goofy? You always wonder, when you get someone, if everybody is calling you goofy, are you really goofy, or is it just that's what's expected of you? And so you just act the part. Because very quickly, within a few weeks, it was just known this was ugly, goofy Mary. And everybody knew it. And Mary knew it. And that's what she had to deal with. And it wouldn't surprise her if that's how people saw her, because that's even how she got to see herself. And everybody wasn't particularly mean. I know we can be very cutting in these things, and probably there were those comments that came to her. But what I noticed from my little standpoint was simply this, is that it was understood she was ugly, goofy Mary, and she was on the outside. Always on the outside. Never really accepted socially into anything. So Mary went through grade 3, grade 4. A little memory of Mary, if I were to pick one out, was in the school closing. Now, I was surprised everybody doesn't do this, but my school, it was just standard practice. We had at the end of every quarter a little kind of variety show, I guess you would call it, and kids got up and sang and did whatever, and they had a little closing going on. It was always a big deal. And Mary got up to sing. She was going to sing a solo song. And you know what? She really didn't have too bad a voice. She was really kind of rocking the tune. However, she was ugly, goofy Mary, and so she got booed. Not because she couldn't sing, because she was ugly, goofy Mary. And man, she put up a brave front for a while and then just kind of melted. And finally, the teachers gave us a good scolding, and then Mary got to come out and choke out the rest of her song. By grade 5, Mary's in my class again. And if you haven't, everybody should have that hot teacher, And I said that in the first class. What do you mean? Was she in flames? No, she was good looking. She was like first year teacher, so 20 years old. Every 5th grade boy was in love with this lady, right? But she was young, and she was also innovative. So she decided, you guys are getting up to that age, we're going to take a class and do nothing but, it's just going to be a dance class. We're going to teach you how to dance. It's a hot dog, you're going to get to go dance with girls. And so she's pairing everybody up, and guess who I get paired up with? Yeah, Mary. How could it happen? All the boys in this class, and I get locked up with Mary. Every boy in the class burst out in laughter, except for me. I cried. And so the teacher diffusing the situation, guess what? She said, okay, she matched up Mary with someone else, and I got to dance with the beautiful teacher. So I was pretty happy. That went from, bottom to top, right? Well, so I thought. I was very happy, but you know what? If I could go back now, knowing what I know, with the nature of God, I would do anything to dance with Mary. I would do anything to dance with her. Someone else at least stepped in. Grade 7, the last year I saw Mary. And once again, the memory is a dance. Isn't it? That's that vulnerable time in public school. Everybody remember their first dance? I imagine they still work the same way. You got all the boys up on this wall, all the girls on this wall, no man's land in the middle. A few brave souls will kind of cross, and then in time, if everything works out, you might get a few people up. Well, it was a typical dance, and things warmed up, and people were out there dancing away, and Mary just wanted to dance. She just wanted to be part of the crowd. And I can still see this. I mean, I was one of the gutless boys. I was on the wall along with all these other losers, up against the wall. And Mary, despite all this rejection she's had been through in her life, came across and went down that entire line. Want to dance, want to dance, want to dance. No, 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 no. And some of the no's not very nice. And she just moved on, including yours truly. Man, what I wouldn't do to go back and say yes. Because I think of the nature of God and how it wasn't showing just then. See, another thing about my life is this was in Eastern Canada, so they have provinces and they have hospitals that are provincial hospitals. And one of the two major mental hospitals was in my town. There was one in the south end and one where we were in the north end. And my father was an occupational therapist, and he worked at this hospital. And I know this won't surprise a lot of people, but I had a lot of exposure to that hospital. And I said, I bet you did. But my dad worked there, so I had an in. We did a lot of things. Sometimes I just go to see my dad. Sometimes when I was playing in a band, the hospital got us to come in and play for the patients. So there was a lot of things. One of these trips in, lo and behold, who's in the hospital? I hadn't seen her for years. Mary is in there. And very pregnant too, by the way, in the mental hospital. And I was still not all that bright at 16 or 17, but man, I went thinking, I'm not surprised. I'm saddened, but I'm not surprised with all that went through her life. And as I think about that, it's amazing, isn't it? 16 years old. I'm like at least 30 now, right? All the time that I've been, and I still can see that second I was in there, and there was Mary trying to show a little dignity to an old classmate in a mental hospital. And by this time, at least trying to be nice to her or civil. But it has dawned on me over the years, what if I would have been this neighbor, the God-defined neighbor? What if I would have been that at even just a few crucial moments back in grade 4 or grade 5? What if I would have been that neighbor? Or even better, what if a whole church of people who are a community of God had been that neighbor for her? Wonder how her life might have turned out a whole lot different. See, it's nice that we're nice to people. It's nice that we're friendly. But how do we treat, what is our heart towards the unloved? towards the unlovable? How is our heart towards those difficult people? Wow, man, how do you even do it? I want to share a secret with you. And it's a verse that you would not have heard in this context. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. This is actually a very rare text. For this reason, it's one of the few places God actually directly describes what his heart is. And he tells you it is gentle and lowly. And it's for those who labor and who are heavy laden. Now, if you transliterated those words, it'd be those who are driven to exhaustion and those who are overwhelmed. Those who are driven to exhaustion and those who are overwhelmed. Does that not describe the ugly, goofy Marys of the world? The unloved? And those are the very people he's talking about. The secret is his heart. And the secret of his heart is gentle and humble. But what does that mean? Because we have our own definition. Gentle, we think of like timid. But Christ was not timid. Christ went into the temple and drove everybody out with a whip. There was nothing timid about that. When the Pharisees got in his face, he got in their face, and he told them exactly who they were. He was not timid in any sense of the word. So gentle must mean something a little different. How about humble? We tend to think of that as lacking confidence, don't we? Well, oh, little me, oh, no, I would never do such and such. I'm just not prepared. I'm just too humble. But humble, according to God, can't be that way. It can't be lack of confidence or hanging your head low, because this is the guy who also stood before thousands of people and said, I am the way. No one comes to the Father but by me. There's no lack of confidence there. This is the man who stood up in a boat and told the storm, settle down, and it listened. There was no lack of confidence, so it must mean something else. So allow me to give you two quick snapshots of what God means by gentle and humble. The secrets you need in order to do what you need to do as a neighbor. John 8, in a nutshell, goes like this. We know it as the woman caught in adultery. Kind of goes like this. Just real quick summary. Pharisees, scribes, they catch this woman red-handed in adultery, drag her out before Jesus, use her as a trap. Because she's committed adultery, by law, she must be stoned. Well, we've got him. Because either Jesus is going to break the law and stone her, and then show himself as having no kindness or compassion, because he was all about that. So how does he do both? Wow. Well, we know how the story goes. He starts writing in the sand. Go ahead, stone her. Hey, they all got their stones. But the one with the least sin, throw the first stone. The one without sin, throw the first stone. Stones drop, one by one, oldest to the youngest. Off they go. And then there's just her and him. He's still writing in the sand. He's not even looking her in the face. Woman, have all your accusers gone? Does no one condemn you? No, no one, sir. Neither do I condemn you. Wow, that's something. But then he adds this on, go and sin no more. So he doesn't let her off the hook. She can't just go and do whatever. But on the other hand, he showed the grace of God. So what is gentleness? Is this. It is showing and being firm enough just to be firm enough. It's being some backbone in your Christian witness, but just enough to show the grace of God and no more. It's not crushing people, but it's not watering them down either. Gentleness is being just enough to open people to the grace of God. That is gentleness. How about humbleness? You might not be surprised. John 13, Last Supper. We'd expect it. How does that go? Where's the humbleness? Well, Jesus takes off his outer garments. He's now prepared as a slave to wash feet. He's going to wash their feet, and they are repulsed. What do you mean you're going to wash my feet? And especially Peter, right? Peter was one extreme or the other. You'll never wash my feet. If I don't wash your feet, you're no part of me. Oh, well, then wash all of me. No, Peter, you're not getting it. Just the feet, Peter, just the feet. You don't understand right now, but you will in time. And of course, by Pentecost, Peter gives the greatest sermon ever given. So he does. Wash the feet. What's getting done here? How is this humbleness? Because he washed feet? No. It has nothing to do with the feet, really. Humbleness is willing to stoop as low as you have to go. And I don't mean morally. I'm talking ego-wise. In order to lift somebody up to God. You will go as low as you have to go to lift somebody up to God. You'll even talk to an ugly Mary in front of all the cool kids. You'll do whatever it takes to lift somebody else up to God. That's what he was doing. That's what it takes to be the type of neighbor Jesus was talking about. Who's your neighbor? Don't worry about that. Are you a neighbor as God defines it?